In the 1980s, a game development studio named HAL Laboratories was founded by Mitsuhiro Ikeda, and although they wouldn't become well known until much later, HAL has always been a pretty important part of Nintendo's history. HAL is responsible for a lot of cool additions to Nintendo's catalog of games, including Earthbound, Kirby, and most notably, Super Smash Bros. But they're also responsible for the always wonderful, ever charismatic Satoru Iwata. Iwata was a talented programmer who got his start making games pretty early in life, but his career officially started as a part-time programmer for HAL Labs while he was attending college. After he graduated from the Tokyo Institute of Technology, he made HAL his full-time job and helped the company establish a very important connection with Nintendo. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Satoru Iwata's history, as a lot of videos have already covered that. So suffice it to say, he gained a big reputation in the programming world for his prowess, his intelligence, and his charisma. If Iwata wasn't rolling up his sleeves to fit the entire Kanto region onto the Game Boy versions of Pokemon Gold and Silver, or porting the battle system from the early Pokemon games over to Pokemon Stadium in just 1 week, he was studying books to make himself a more effective leader. So now we cut to 2002. The launch of the GameCube had done completely poorly, and Yamauchi, believing that he could no longer guide the company properly as president, decided to retire in 2002. To everyone's surprise again, he promoted Satoru Iwata to the presidency of Nintendo. Yamauchi had these words for Iwata as he left his father's company: "Give birth to wholly new ideas and create hardware which reflects that ideal." Iwata took control of Nintendo during one of the darkest, most uncertain times in the company's history. The recently released GameCube had just been crushed by its competitors. Nintendo had no plans for online gaming whatsoever, which was becoming a huge draw for gaming consoles. The company was behind in the tech of its competitors and had earned a reputation as a casual gaming platform thanks to the company's colorful mascots and wide appeal amongst children. While Yamauchi had led Nintendo to some amazing achievements, his leadership strategy had promoted an environment of competition rather than collaboration. Research teams fought to outdo one another. Third-party developers were all but given a giant middle finger, and Nintendo as a whole had been slow to change in an evolving industry, leaving them fighting to catch up to their competition. Under Yamauchi, the company just did not communicate. While Iwata had a great deal of affection for his predecessor, he quickly realized Nintendo would have to change in a big way if they hoped to compete against Sony and Microsoft. The company would have to be united in a way it had never been before so they could step forward. His first act as president was to gather all 40 department heads and 150 employees for a meeting together. It's there in this meeting that he outlined his goals, his desire to bridge communications internally. He even opened the floor up to discussion so each employee could voice their opinions. He promoted an atmosphere of total creativity and openness. He wanted the guy in the marketing department, if he had an idea for a game, to be able to talk directly to the development team. It was a whole new world for Nintendo employees, who had normally followed the creative direction of just one person, as we've seen throughout the history. As his second act, Iwata promoted Shigeru Miyamoto, Ginyu Takeda, Yoshihiro Mori, and Shinji Hatano to the company's board of directors, making them his equals rather than his peers. This was very important as it allowed them to challenge him directly about the direction they wanted to take the company, giving each of them an input about the future of Nintendo. A rather important part of Nintendo's history was the 2005 publishing of a book by W. Chan Kim and Renee Marburn called Blue Ocean Strategy. The Blue Ocean Strategy book was an intrepid look into the marketing business strategies of major companies over a vast number of years. The basic premise of the book was you should seek new untapped markets rather than fighting with competitors in a contested market. Historically, Nintendo had begun production of one console after the release of another console, So when the GameCube hit store shelves in 2002, Nintendo's engineers were already hard at work making another console. But Iwata, once he took charge, firmly believed that Nintendo would ultimately lose if they had to fight their competitors on a one-to-one technological scale. Microsoft and Sony had the capital to keep raising the technological bar higher. Nintendo did too, to a certain extent, but what would be the point? Rather than compete in a fierce console war where the only thing that changed were hardware specs, Iwata wanted to find that market sweet spot that their competitors just weren't a part of yet. Yokoi had promoted the virtues of accessibility. Miyamoto had taken that one step further with accessibility in terms of software. And now, in its third iteration, Iwata would expand on it once more by promoting the accessibility of the entire video game industry.
Core gamers have a huge appetite for challenge. Casual gamers want less difficulty. At Nintendo, we believe it is our responsibility to make games for all skill levels. And most definitely, that includes people who are not playing our games now.
Nintendo would not innovate by doubling down on hardware. It would innovate by being unique. Iwata canceled the prototype console that was already in development, and production on two new consoles began instead: the Nintendo Wii and the Nintendo DS. The Nintendo Wii was first revealed at the Tokyo Game Show in 2005, and it was here at this same game show that Iwata reiterated the company's belief that everyone was a gamer, regardless of age or experience. It was later revealed that the controller that went with the console would use motion controls rather than a traditional controller. The hope was that they could induct casual gamers who wouldn't be scared off by having to learn a controller. With titles like Wii Fit and Wii Sports, the console began one of Nintendo's huge success stories. By tapping into the casual gaming crowd who felt excluded by the expensive PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 systems, they were able to grasp a larger share of the market, despite being a technologically inferior system. The Wii outsold both the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 by over 20 million units, winning the console war for Nintendo for the first time in nearly a decade. Despite record sales, the Wii's success actually had a pretty bad side effect. Nintendo's image as a gaming company took a substantial hit, and this mostly came from the dedicated gaming crowd who felt the system just didn't offer them enough to justify buying it. To tap the casual gamer, Nintendo had built a system that had wide accessibility, but because of this, they had to limit the amount of difficulty that would be in a single game. Nintendo already had the reputation of a family-friendly console maker, and the Wii did not offer much in terms of destroying that image. Criticisms like this are what led to the creation of the Wii U, a hybrid semi-portable system designed like a tablet, and the Nintendo 3DS, the successor to the DS that would allow a player to experience 3D without special glasses. Iwata believed that these new consoles were the path to that blue ocean boom they'd experienced with the Wii. He may have well been right on that, but as we are about to see, both consoles would run into some massive problems. The development of the Wii U began in 2008. In order to get back the hardcore gaming crowd, they began working on features that they thought they might want: high-definition graphics, an online network for multiplayer, and more support for third-party developers. However, they didn't want to lose the ground they gained with the casual gaming audience either, so they chose a name that would be at once familiar to the casual gaming crowd, yet let core gamers know they had listened to their criticisms. And that's how they got to the idea of naming the console the Wii U. Nintendo has always been pretty stubborn when it comes to changes. Because of this fact, they'd fallen behind the video game industry standards with the launch of the Wii. Games officially were in high definition now. Consoles all had dedicated network infrastructure for multiplayer, and third-party developers were the selling points of most consoles. Nintendo really didn't have any of that. Microsoft and Sony had already been through the hell of switching to high-definition graphics. It'd been especially painful for those in the industry as a whole, refining these new changes gamers wanted. Nintendo had been doing the same thing they'd been doing from the 90s, and had absolutely no practice with the kind of things that were modern video game staples. First-party support over at Nintendo, meaning the internal development teams, had no experience whatsoever working with HD graphics. This is the reason why so many flagship titles were missing from the roster when the Wii U went on sale. The internal development teams at Nintendo were struggling hard to make their games work in an HD environment, and they fell massively behind schedule. Nintendo's strengths have always been their first-party games, and their biggest weaknesses had been third-party integration, and now they were relying on third-party support to keep the console afloat until they could get a handle on first-party development. Unfortunately, third-party developers found the Wii U hardware extremely hard to code for, and would often seek help from the engineers headquartered in Japan. Yet any interaction between Nintendo and third-party development teams took upwards of a week to get any answer. The process was something like this whenever anyone had a question. Third-party development teams would run into an issue trying to use the dev kit hardware. Those same devs would reach out to the support team at a local Nintendo branch. Support team at the local Nintendo branch would send the question off to a translator. Translator would translate it in Japanese and then send it to the devs in Japan. Devs in Japan would send a response that would once again go through the translator. Translator would send it to the support team, and support team would finally send it back to the developer. If the response back to the developer didn't cover the original question, which unfortunately happened quite a bit, it would go through this process again, which made it an absolute nightmare to develop for. The initial unveiling of the Wii U system had been with some fanfare, as Nintendo had taken the effort to secure third-party developers ahead of time. People thought Nintendo was really learning from the industry and trying to make an effort to draw people to the system. But those same third-party developers quietly dropped support for the system once they discovered just how unfriendly the development process was. This, combined with slow sales for the Wii U upon release, chased off any third-party developer trying to produce games for the console. Again, Nintendo had failed to keep up with the times. The failure of the Wii U created a huge outcry against Iwata, who many investors claimed went into this process completely blind, despite there being available market data to prove how complicated it was going to be. Not only that, but they had messed up with the simplest thing of all, which was the name of the console. The Wii U sounded like an expansion for the Wii, and many people, including the casual gaming crowd, who this was marketed for, didn't understand that it was an entirely new system. This, paired with the fact that no first-party titles were available hardly at all upon launch, and third-party developers pulled out, creating this massive gap of games for a console that just wasn't going to be there, led to the Wii U's big failure. Usually this would be when Nintendo would rely on the strength of their mobile gaming consoles, but sad to say the 3DS also ran into quite a bit of trouble upon its release. The first issue was the price tag, $249.99. Though this wasn't as big of a factor as many people thought. No, the real problem with the 3DS was the same as the Wii U. There were no good first-party titles on launch. Though the 3DS would eventually recuperate sales thanks to some excellent titles, we have to remember that when this system launched, there was virtually nothing for it. The first-party games were Pilotwings Resort, Steel Diver, and Nintendogs and Cats. They just couldn't justify that kind of price. Once they realized their mistake, Nintendo did end up lowering the price to $169.99, but without popular titles from their dozens of notable franchises, the 3DS sales continued to remain lackluster. The Wii U, combined with the 3DS sales for that year, led to one of Nintendo's worst fiscal years ever as a gaming company. In 2014, Iwata issued a public apology, saying that he had mistimed the market. As a result, the entire Nintendo board of directors took a pretty hefty pay cut to keep their work staff employed. Iwata wanted to take Nintendo into a blue ocean. They had done that to some degree when it came to the hardware ideas of their newest consoles. The portability of the tablet controller for the Wii U wasn't a bad idea. Same could be said for the 3D capabilities of the 3DS. The problem wasn't the ideas of the consoles, it was the execution from Nintendo's side of things, as they juggled HD graphics changes, more third-party integration, and network support infrastructure. Nintendo seems to have understood what was at the root of the Wii U's failure, as they moved on to production for the next generation of home consoles. Iwata began to court third-party developers well in advance, establishing a more efficient support system to help guide them on the new hardware. Not only that, but first-party development teams had been given time to overcome the hurdles of the big changes to the new consoles. Unfortunately, Iwata would not see the release of the Switch. On July 11, 2015, Satoru Iwata would pass away due to complications from surgery. Following his death, Shigeru Miyamoto and Ginyu Takeda stepped up to lead the company until a new president could be elected. Iwata did a lot for Nintendo over his 15 years as president, although it's really hard for a lot of people to give him proper credit, since his achievements weren't always tangible things. He opened Nintendo to the world. He broke down the barriers of competition and created collaboration throughout the company. And through popular segments like Iwata Asks, he allowed fans and employees alike to get a peek behind the curtain at the highest levels of the company. Iwata was a charming, good-spirited, and quirky-humored man who fans came to absolutely adore.
The name came from the computer in the movie 2001 Space Odyssey. How? We thought that name was very cool. Also, this is what I looked like back then. Thank you. Like all game creators, I was extremely cool too, don't you think?
On March 3, 2017, the Nintendo Switch was released to the world, and thanks to launching with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it became an overnight success. On the date this video was published, Nintendo Switch sales figures in the console's first year overtook the Wii U, selling an impressive 7.63 million units worldwide. This proved to third-party developers that the Nintendo Switch was a console that would be here to stay, and with the launch of Super Mario Odyssey, one of the most highly anticipated Mario games of all time, sales numbers continued increasing every day. The history of Nintendo has been crafted by the hands of giants. But now that the age of Gunpei Yokoi, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Satoru Iwata are coming to a close, what can we expect for the future?